Anthony, pronouns he, him, calling in from Vicarious Anteaters, who says that irreducible complexity is impossible for evolution to create, which is that's a rough one. It's a rough one. Anthony, you're on the line with Forrest and Erika. How you doing today?
Doing fine. How are y'all?
Never had a bad day, man.
Glad to hear that.
Erica, except for Erica has a sandwich, and I'm jealous of that. I guess my day could be better, but
I think your day might get worse as a result of my conversation with you, though. I don't want to. I don't want it to, but it might.
I hope not. I'm sure you'll be pleasant.
Anthony, that's not
Yeah.
possible. You forget I love talking to creationists, and so does Forrest.
We've kind of made a living out of it.
It might be a sickness, that's possible, but we love it. So tell us where you're coming from. I want to hear about it. The floor is yours.
Well, when I called in, I recently brought up the concept of irreducible complexity, and I know both of you are familiar with that concept.
Unfortunately,
but I wasn't expecting Forrest to bring up Evo Devo, and then, which I also think is a problem for evolution.
Hang on a minute, Anthony. You need to back off your mic.
Is it better now?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Let me know.
That's all right. Shit happens. That's why we have the producer to be like, "Yo, do this thing."
Right.
By the way, thanks to Amar, our producer today.
Yes. So you brought up the concept of Evo Devo, and I wasn't expecting you to do that, but I see that as a serious problem for evolution. And a lot of what I wanted to say actually was kind of already at least somewhat addressed in the previous conversation. And he brought up the mathematical improbability of finding functional proteins in protein sequence space, which I think is also a really strong argument against evolution. So I don't know let me start with, I guess we'll start with irreducible complexity, and depending on how long the call goes, we can go any one of those directions.
Let's have fun with it, yeah. I think that's probably the most fertile ground to start on, because if we go into mathematics and things, no one's going to care. So yeah, let's start with irreducible complexity.
All right, so let me set the groundwork here. So biological organisms are systems,
as all organisms are.
Yes, which are composed of subsystems, which are themselves composed of various components, right? And in these systems, some of them can be removed, obviously. And we're talking down to at the macroscopic level and the microscopic level. And what is clear to everyone who's any rational person is a lot of the components of these systems are necessary for the function of the whole system. So if you take one away, there's no adaptation or productive benefit to what we're looking at. So this seems to me to be a huge problem for evolutionary processes, which have to work in a stepwise fashion and which need a positive or beneficial result in order to select whatever the adaptation or mutation is. So what evidence do you have that this seems to make evolution impossible to me? So explain to me why you believe evolution can overcome this problem.
Erika, do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
I'm happy to start. Anthony,
okay.
Do you are you familiar with Michael Behe's mousetrap analogy?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that, and I know it was brought up in the Dover trial.
Are you familiar with what's his name? Francis Collins. Are you familiar with Francis Collins's response to the mousetrap analogy?
The type 3 secretory system?
No, the mousetrap analogy itself.
Okay, so yeah, he put a mousetrap on his tie, or he used it as a paperweight or something. I do remember something along those lines.
Right. The
Is that
idea
what you're talking
he showed
about?
up yeah, 100%. You're dead on. So he shows up to a lecture and talking about Behe's mousetrap analogy, and he says, and for those of you in the audience who may not know, Michael Behe, famous proponent of intelligent design and one of the popularizers of this idea of irreducible complexity, is an argument against evolution by natural selection from a naturalistic perspective. Although Michael Behe is, from my understanding, quite accepting of things like common descent, and he just believes must interact in order to bring these things about. He doesn't think the process alone can do it. He points to a mousetrap, which has 5 parts in its most simplistic form. And if you have parts, the mousetrap cannot function, it cannot catch mice. And he says this is an example of an irreducibly complex system. You could never come about to evolve a mousetrap that whose purpose is to catch mice without any given point. It can't be fit every step along the way. So therefore, the same could be applied to systems from biochemical systems, I guess I should say, or organ systems, or what have you. And Francis Collins, director of the Human Genome Project, famously responded to this by coming to a lecture with a mousetrap with the hold down bar, and I believe it was the catch. I think it was the catch removed from the mousetrap. So 2 out of the 3 parts were removed. And he had the mousetrap clip was tied. He said, then this mousetrap isn't catching any ties or any mice. Sure makes a nice tie clip. The point being that things don't evolve with a singular goal in mind. That's not the point. The way must be beneficial to the organism, but they don't have to be beneficial to it in the exact same way. The argument went at the time of the Dover trial for something like the flagellum, which is classically complex, that originally bacterial flagellum served a different purpose. I believe it was like secreting some kind of poison, for lack of a better term. I don't remember if for that example, but the point is often applied to organisms that are much larger. So, like birds didn't evolve wings to fly; they have thermoregulation or display or intimidation. And case in point, we see birds today that do not fly, that have wings, and use them for all of those things. So, in response to something like irreducible complexity, I point out one, irreducible complexity as an argument kind of falls apart with the presumption that every step along the way has to be moving towards a specific goal and must benefit fitness in service of that specific goal, which isn't how evolution works. But the second point that I think is almost more important from an intuitive perspective is that it's like we see things that are irreducibly complex emerge naturally all the time without human input. And my favorite example of this that I bring up every time irreducible complexity comes up is an ecosystem. We have watched ecosystems emerge. We have seen ecosystems emerge on islands as primary succession and then secondary succession come about, or just primary succession comes about. As organisms and then populations of organisms develop these interdependent relationships, like the communities of which would completely fall apart if you that ecosystem, if you remove the primary producer, or they cannot function without every single a piece of the ecosystem puzzle in place. Now they do adapt. You can take it back. Will going to be the same ecosystem, and yet this system that is irreducibly complex that cannot maintain its status as that ecosystem had emerged stepwise over time, right? And we've again observed this happening. So irreducible complexity as a whole class, whether we're looking macroscopically at communities or even microscopically at structures on microorganisms, it doesn't hold any water than a 10-minute glance, in my opinion.
Before,
Forrest?
can you hear me? Wait 1 second. For some reason, you were breaking up badly. Is my audio coming in
No,
well?
you're okay. There was an issue. We're not sure where the issue is, but we have noticed it and we're trying to fix it. I don't think it's on your
Okay,
end
so
though.
I hear Forrest perfectly, but Erika was breaking up really badly. But I did manage to
Yeah.
understand essentially everything she said.
She is
Okay,
currently trying to
Forrest.
fix it. I'll also point out that John McDonald from the University of Delaware famously released this, which I'm putting in the chat right now. It is the reducibly complex mousetrap, and it's like a step-by-step theoretical thing about how mousetraps could actually evolve piece by piece and how that could work. And it's kind of just like this tongue-in-cheek, like pointing out how this is a silly accusation to make. And it bothered Michael Behe so much that he published this like response to critics thing where he criticized Dr. McDonald, saying that like, oh, he didn't tell us like what the structure was made of, and like what's the density of the wood, and what's and all the other stuff that he himself also didn't bother to mention. But now that he has this thrown back in his face, he needs a bunch more details. Yeah, I would just throw out that like when we talk about irreducible complexity, we're very often looking at big structures as they are right now. So, say for example, that one of the more common things that people bring up with irreducible complexity is the human eye, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, the eye is so amazingly complex. It's got this lens, and it's got this retina, and it's got these ciliary muscles that squeeze the internal lens, and it's got all these different things that adjust the focus, and just so perfectly fine tuned." And they're missing the fact that, yeah, if you took one chunk out of the human eye now, you'd have a major problem. But we can see a step-by-step gradient even out in nature, where we can see different types of eyes that are just a little bit different from each other, that are each functional and useful and can be put in sequence quite easily. And the little additions that would turn one to the next aren't that extreme. And these are things that even like we can just see today are currently eyes that are out in nature right now. And so it's really important to remember that when you're looking at these so-called irreducibly complex systems or structures or whatever, don't just look at exactly what it is at this moment as it is now very specialized and say this is the only way this thing can exist. You can look backwards and see different ways for this thing to exist that are a lot simpler, and a lot more easy to evolve. Anyway, you've listened to Erika talk for a little while. I gave a very brief thing. I have other stuff, but I would like to hear what you have to say first.
Okay, yeah. So one thing I've noticed from both of you and also a lot of people who uh, basically embrace evolution is that you just accept without. I'm not trying to be rude, but it seems to me like you just kind of accept what these evolutionary theorists put forward, and just in an uncritical manner. And I know that's kind of a confrontational thing to say, but like when Erika said that the bacterial flagellum used to be a type 3 or a poison secreting mechanism, that's never actually been demonstrated. That's just something that various evolutionary scientists said. Well, this secretory system in this organism kind of looks like the flagellum, so maybe it got co-opted at some point, and it's like that idea has been debunked by the intelligent design community. And when it comes to things like the eye, I think the eye is a good example. There are two things I'd like to say about that. First of all, Forrest, when you bring up the fact that there are different types of eyes in the world we observe today, yeah, so we have simple organisms with simple eyes, and we have more complex organisms with more complex eyes. The eyes that we see are simply designed for the organism in question as it is. The idea that these represent an evolutionary history is an interpretation that is based on the presupposition of the truth of evolution itself. It's not actually based in an observation of an evolutionary path. And as far as I'm aware, the fossil record does not show a linear progression from simple eyes to complex eyes. The first organisms to appear in the fossil record already had animals, I should say. The first animals to appear in the fossil record already had very complex eyes.
So that's fundamentally untrue. But like but you might have misspoke. You're saying the first animals with eyes that are fossilized, and the eyes are already complex, right?
You're correct.
That's
yes,
also
correct.
not true. That's also
Yeah,
not
so
true. We have worm precursors, like in the Ediacaran. One was published on just earlier this week. And this individual, like worms have, many of them do, like photosensitive patches. Further, the types of eyes that you see early in the Ediacaran fauna are not camera pinhole eyes, right? Like they're not the types of eyes that you see in later organisms. Now, I want to say something really important here, and I'm going to try not to be too animated because that seems to be what kills my my internet connection. So and it's a shame because my speech was really good. What I'm going to summarize for you, Anthony, and I hope you got this, is that we see irreducibly complex systems emerge now with no influence from humans. An ecosystem is the primary example. We watch primary succession happen. Ecosystems cannot sustain themselves if you move one single part from them permanently. They have to fundamentally change, become a different type of ecosystem. As a result, we know that by observing this actually happen via primary succession on like islands and things of that nature, that these things, which are currently irreducibly complex, emerge on their own without the influence of humans. Now, the type of argument that you've just made here is just a complete argument from incredulity, in my opinion. What you've said is that you have to assume evolution to prove evolution here. That's fundamentally untrue, right? These predictions were laid out by Darwin, right? The idea when Darwin lamented when he was publishing Origin and when he later published Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex, that the evolution of the eye was something that seemed confounding to him at first until you give it, 20 minutes of thought. And you see that, as Forrest talked about with relation to the eye, we do see these steps. Every single step along the way for the evolution of the eye exists in extant organisms, right? Not only that, but the pathways have been traced in many of these organisms, as we were discussing with the previous caller, like which switches need to be turned on and off to get certain outcomes, to get certain macroscopic changes and phenotypic changes, I guess I should say, in these organisms. Now, when you ask for something like a fossil transition, I'm going to speak from my area of expertise here because you accidentally traipsed into it. When it comes to the evolutionary lineages of the fossil record, right, like hominins, for example, so humans evolving from a more basal Miocene ape, we see every singular characteristic that makes an anatomically modern human emerge from a basal ape, something along the lines of Sahelanthropus chilensis, or earlier, approximately 70,000 years ago. These emerge sometimes stepwise, sometimes they emerge as mosaic systems, and we document them in thousands of individual specimens across hundreds of different individuals over time, over geologic time, which is the precise prediction that evolutionary theory makes, morphologic change over geologic time. To top that off, we have the molecular clock and also, Evo Devos we discussed earlier that corroborates this. The timing of the emergence of each of these given characteristics matches expectations from genetics all the way into paleontology. And that's just what I study. That's just human evolution. We see this with the evolution of whales from Indo-Hyas, from land-dwelling artiodactyls. We see it in the evolution of tetrapods, land-dwelling tetrapods from a Eusinophtheran style ancestor. We see it in the evolution of wings and flight and modern birds from their archosaur ancestors. We see it in the development of any lineage that you could possibly pick for which there is a fossil record. We see that morphologic change over geologic time, and it is corroborated by the genetics when we have them. So to say that this is just so is to betray that, and maybe this is true, maybe I'm wrong on this, but I don't think you've read the original predictions of the people who drummed evolutionary theory up in the middle 1800s. The idea that underscores all of this, because they weren't trying to prove any existing idea. They were coming up with an idea and seeing how it fared. Forrest?
I also want to point out the fact that, like, you mentioned that it sounds like we're just taking this uncritically and that we're just not questioning what we're being told. I don't know, if you have any kind of like higher education or like what your educational background looks like, but both Erika and I have graduate degrees, and a big part of grad school is not just going to class and being told a more complicated version of what you learned in your bachelor's. It is actually critically analyzing the data that's in front of you. It is getting, like, I can't tell you how many classes I've had where the entire class is, here are 5 papers about the thing that we're talking about this week. Read them and tell me why they're wrong. And tell me what could be done better. And why do you agree with what they're saying? Even if their conclusion is right, do they have a reason to get to that conclusion? Does it sound more like they already knew what they wanted to publish and they just tried to find a way to publish it? Or does it sound like they did an experiment and they was telling you the results? Like, what does this paper mean? Like, critical analysis and critical thinking is a major part of higher education. And it sounds to me, the way that you're using the term critical or whatever, like when you're talking about this, It's the way that a lot of creationists tend to use it, which is to say, if you were being critical, you would reject this. Critical thinking is the same as just saying something is wrong. And indeed, I have an example of how this could work. This is a website. I'm going to put it in the chat. This is from the Genetic Science Learning Center from the University of Utah, learn.genetics.utah.edu. And they have this page on evolution, and it's a really short read, really, really short. Talks about evolution and what eyes are and what they're for. And at the end of this, the researchers that put this thing together, they identified 1,800 tiny improvements, starting with a flat, light-sensitive patch, 1,800 defined tiny improvements to form a complex image-forming eye like we would see today. And they calculated, because they were doing a critical analysis, does this make any freaking sense, that you could make those improvements over the course of 360,000 generations, which would take just a couple of 100,000 years, with 550 million years since the formation of the oldest eyes in the fossil record. That means we could evolve eyes from scratch 1,500 times. Basic, tiny little improvements over generations. And they were able to calculate this by doing the exact critical analysis that you're accusing us of not doing. And so it's not just a matter of faith to say that I believe in evolution, therefore I believe this thing had to have evolved. We're actually able to test this stuff. And when it comes to something complex like eyes, legs, upright walking, meat eating, you pick your favorite, mosaic evolution is also something that's coming into this. It's not just generation after generation of specifically this one exact thing evolving, and every change has to be perfect. And if you don't have all these changes together, it's not right. It's different things evolving at different rates in different times. It's allometry. It's different rates of development and evolution over time. And it leads to an emergent property later that evolution isn't something that's a causal intelligent agent that's like, I need to figure out bipedal walking, so I'm going to start by tweaking the foramen magnum, and then we'll start on the feet, and then we'll do. It's just a thing that's now allowed because of all of these different little changes. And we see that with a lot of complex structures. We see that with emergent properties that we get out of like whole organ systems. It's certainly you could point to tool use in humans and say, oh, this is ridiculously complex, even though there is like a little bit of evidence for a genetic component to it. It's certainly not like, that 2 million years ago or 2.5 million years ago, it's like, all right, Homo habilis, you got to break this thing this way. Otherwise I'll never make an iPhone. This is just an emergent property. This is something that's developed over time. So yeah, man, it sounds to me, and you were very kind to say that you mean no disrespect. I will also say I mean no disrespect. It sounds to me like you've been listening to the straw men that intelligent design advocates put up, trying to pretend like intelligent design is any different than the same old magic that any other creationist proposes. And you're listening to their straw men and their arguments rather than actually looking into what biology actually is and what biologists actually study.
Yeah, what the universities do is they teach everyone to view everything that is observed through an evolutionary interpretive lens, when that isn't necessarily warranted.
That's not true.
Yes, it is.
That's not true.
They teach.
It's absolutely not true. I'm really sorry, but that's like fundamentally.
I have had creationist professors
in the university system. I've been in a university system for over 10 years now, and I can tell you for a fact that is absolutely not true.
Yeah.
I'm currently
working on my 6th degree, Anthony. I can tell you that you're wrong. I'm sorry.
You're telling me they don't stand up there at the front of the class and say, evolution is the fundamental unifying principle of all biology. Nothing makes sense in biology except in the light of evolution. You never heard any of your professors say something like that?
That was Dovsansky that said that, and I actually love that quote. But yeah, we do say things like that from time to time because it's true. And then we explain what evolution is, how it works, common arguments against it. We allow for discussion about whether or not it is real and why it isn't real. I've had a creationist professor before that explained the issues in front of the class that he had with it, and we talked it out. So to say that there's just this dogma that's being pushed on students is to fundamentally misunderstand how higher education works in the very first place. Because the point of higher education is not to teach you what to think, it's to teach you how to think. Is to teach you how to critically analyze the things that you're being presented with, and how to make sense of what you're talking about.
Forrest, you got it.
I have to ask, Anthony. I'm sorry, Eric. I just have to ask: have you ever gone to college? Do you have any higher education?
I do. I have gone to college. I graduated from a 4-year university.
Okay, what degree did you get?
I don't feel I need to reveal that personally, but I will say science.
Did you get a science degree?
It was not a science degree, but science classes were part of the prerequisite. So I took chemistry, I took physics, I actually don't think I took a biology course.
So you took 1,000 level science courses for a non-science bachelor's degree, which means you would have just covered the very basics that you need to survive in a conversation about those sciences. You didn't study like major evidences. You probably didn't study the history of these things. If you took a chemistry course at a 1,000 level, they were probably telling you what an atom is, what different types of bonds are, how to read the periodic table, what titration is. Very simple things like that. They weren't going over the history of atomic theory, how we know atoms are real, why Vesper theory works, differences in opinion on like big themes in cosmology and like where atoms first formed. If you took introductory physics, you probably learned a little kinematics. You probably learned a little bit about vectors. You did not study major issues with the Big Bang, how differences of opinion in like the graduate level of physics is about, why is the universe eternal or not. Like, you would have covered the basics of these sciences in order to learn the vocabulary and basic functionality of them. You didn't get into a discussion about them, and you never were given the opportunity to, which is fine. But to then take that 1,000 level education and come in here and say at the graduate level, for sure there is no discussion and it's all just dogma, is a ridiculously arrogant thing to do.
I would like to add something here that I think is really important for the context of this discussion, which is that I am very we were discussing this at the beginning of the show. I don't know if you caught it, Anthony, but like I'm very anti ivory towers. I hate that. If there's a paywall but for a paper, that makes me hate the publishers of that paper. Well, not the publishers of that paper, because publishing is expensive, but it makes me hate the paper, right? The journal. I think that science should be accessible to absolutely everybody. It is one of humanity's greatest tools. And so it should be access to science should be a human right, in my opinion. Now that being said, to sort of preface this, right? I'm not speaking to you from like I'm more educated than you are. Although there is a role that expertise plays in discussions like this. I'm not going to go up to a physicist and tell them that they are a moron for assuming the Big Bang theory, right? What I understand is that somebody with a graduate level education in physics or astrophysics more specifically understands the pros and cons of Big Bang cosmology in comparison to others, as Forrest said. But I'm going to speak to you very plainly here on something that's quite intuitive, and that's that. Why aren't you applying that level of skepticism to other theories within science? We assume germ theory to do medicine. We assume atomic theory to do physics. You exclusively have a beef with evolutionary theory because you, prior, have decided that you don't like it. I don't believe for 1 second that you have gone through and poured through the literature on this and find evolutionary theory unconvincing, because creationists don't even find evolutionary theory unconvincing. They don't like common descent. They don't like the application of the principles of evolutionary theory back in time. But from Answers in Genesis to CMI to ICR to the Discovery Institute to the New Creation blog, every single one of them. Well, okay, actually, I need to take ICR out of it because they're doing their CET thing. The vast majority of them accept the principles of natural selection, gene flow, genetic drift, and mutation as being responsible for generating biodiversity within kinds, as they so love to point out. But you are not playing this game in good faith, in my opinion, because I don't, and maybe I'm wrong, like maybe what you're going to say next is going to totally change my mind. And it turns out you're applying equal levels of skepticism to germ theory and atomic theory. But I just don't think that's the case. Now, I'm going to drag us back kicking and screaming to this concept of irreducible complexity because Forrest and I just presented you with examples of lineages and systems that evolve that are presumed or have been proposed by creationists to be irreducibly complex. And your response to that wasn't, I don't think that their solution to irreducible complexity in this case is relevant or appropriate because XYZ. Your response was, well, they're biased. They're assuming it to prove it. That is not how science works. If you want to pick up a bone with evolutionary theory, you need to come at it from a scientific perspective. You need to say, oh, the secretarial solution problem that was proposed is inadequate because A, B, C, D, E, F, G, not request that we show you the last universal common ancestor evolving into humans in real time, because that's simply not going to happen. It's untenable. And as I said, it's not scientific.
All right. Well, there's a lot there to try to tackle. First thing I'll say is this, which is that if you don't think that the Western university education system is in its current phase designed to promote a certain worldview, then I feel sorry for you. That's just how I feel.
And I feel
clearly,
like if you think that it is, you've never been to grad school.
Okay.
My first master's was in bioanthropology, and we spent a lot of time talking about exactly that. Why we shouldn't be pushing a Western worldview and a Western narrative and how to decolonize education. Like 110%, that was a major part of it. Go ahead, though.
What if I told you that Fox News has no bias? Is they just sit their opinions, but their opinions are based on the truth. Well, how would you feel about that?
You would be demonstrably
Anthony, I feel like you're seriously
that's how I feel about you guys. You're sitting there, you're defending these people.
But the issue is that's your feeling, not a demonstrable thing. I'm sorry, Erika, please go ahead.
I've got a quick thing. There's an important distinction here. Opinion and science are not the same thing. Fox News or MSNBC, for that matter, pick the most liberal and the most conservative news sources on the flippin' planet. They are not coming to their solutions through the scientific method. The scientific method, from its core to its core, is intended and utilized. In fact, it's actually subjective proof. If it's actually being applied. Now, the interpretation of data can be subjective, but there's a ton of science out there. In fact, I would argue the vast majority of it, whose results are not going to be open to interpretation to the extent that you can create an entire theory that withstands 150 plus years of scrutiny from every religious nutter and some non-religious nutters under the sun trying to tear it down. And yet not only, and I'm saying this because it's true, right? I've spent quite a bit of time arguing with people with your perspective, Anthony, and I've spent a lot of time, neck deep in the literature on this. The assumptions of evolutionary quite literally do underpin medicine, agriculture, field after field after field, where you have to action operates. You have to assume that gene flow, mutation, and genetic drift are operating in order to actually understand how the population of critters that you're working with works. This is not an assumption that's being made in a vacuum. It's an assumption that perhaps to the exclusion of, I would even say, every other theory on the planet, has been put through the ringer because of perspectives like yours. People don't want, a lot of people out there with, typically religious perspectives, but some without, don't want evolution to be true because they believe that the only way that you can accept evolution is from a naturalistic perspective, which is also fallacious, but I digress. They want to be special. They want life as wonderful and magical as this to require an active hand. But the fact of the matter is, no matter how threatening that might feel, the science is not bearing out that is required. You can feel that it is, and you can say that the universities are brainwashing people if you'd like. And, again, I'm trying not to speak from an ivory tower here. So what I would suggest is that start with the basics. Go read up on what evolutionary theory actually claims. And if you're going to say to me that you know what it claims, my next question for you is locked and loaded, so be careful.
Mm-hmm.
I will admit I don't know nearly as much about the specific facts as you two do, but I know enough to know that when it comes to this claim that evolution underpins these practical sciences. It's actually simply a veneer. And the term I like to use is an interpretive lens that isn't based on anything real. I just want to give you an example. One example. Erika, earlier you brought up the so-called evolutionary lineage of whales, and you brought up the example of Indohyus. And you said we see this evolutionary progression from this four-legged creature to this large aquatic mammal. And I just have to sit here and think to myself, like, what is she really? Does she really think she sees this? Like, you are interpreting something. They put these pictures, these cartoons in books of an Indohyus, and then they draw a line to the whale, and they say, "This is what happened."
I'm gonna have to cut you off here because I am officially triggered. The whale evolution thing has started to get me more and more, and mostly because every time that one animation, everybody in chat will know the one I'm talking about, used to go viral on Twitter. The one that shows Indohyus evolving, through Pachycetus and Ambulocetus up through Dorodon and into Basilosaurus. It's just flooded. We used to be flooded, inundated, if you will, with creationists who are like, "Oh, it's lines on paper, it's cartoons." So I'm gonna ask two questions of you here, Anthony, that are pretty important. And the first one I'm gonna kind of give you a second, and then I'm gonna probably jump in because there's an answer that should be relatively quickly deliverable on this one. And then the second question is going to be a bit more involved, so I'll probably kick it to Forrest before I ask it. But I'm going to ask this first. Why do you think Indohyus is proposed as the common ancestor of whales?
Because the scientists knew they needed a supposed land-dwelling.
Nope. Why? What about its morphology tells you that it's ancestral to whales? Why did they think that little four-legged critter, as opposed to every other four-legged critter from the Eocene, is the ancestor of whales? What is it about it?
I believe they claim that its inner earlobe is suitable for aquatic lifestyle, if I'm not mistaken.
Its inner ear lobe, or the involucrum,
its inner ear bone structure. Something about its bone structure is its ear.
The reason why I'm flexing on you here with my jargon is because it's important. The inner ear that you find in Indohyus, it's not an ear lobe, it's the inner ear. So it's a series of bones that are like intrinsically related to the substrate or like the habitat that you live in. That inner ear, the structure called the involucrum, is found in Indohyus, and then only whales, exclusively. Only modern whales have the involucrum, and as you go through the fossil record, every single other organism that has the involucrum is successfully more aquatic as you move through the geologic column. The second reason why Indohyus is proposed, morphologically speaking, to be the ancestor of whales is because Indohyus is an artiodactyl. That means it has an astragalus. This is a type of double-spooled ankle joint that allows it to have more leverage. It's more efficient. It's more stable for fast-moving animals, of which artiodactyls tend to be. Now that ankle, the astragalus, exists only in artiodactyls today. Artiodactyls are even-toed mammals, even-toed hoofed mammals. Every single one of those proposed links through cetacean evolution, through whale evolution, has the involucrum, and they have the ankle of a deer. What is every single successive cetacean ancestor doing with the inner ear and ankle of a hooved, even-toed artiodactyl living on land in the Eocene in the same place through the geologic column, in addition to that, gaining more and more successively, aquatic characteristics that is then reflected in the genome of modern whales, an example of which being modern whales have all of the genes necessary for smelling above water, which is very different setup than smelling underneath water because of the nature of picking up particulates in the air versus in the water, right? Whales have all of the ones that terrestrial mammals have, and none of the ones that aquatic animals have, like aquatic animals like fish and sharks and things of that nature. Except every single one of them, besides a handful, are silenced. They are turned off. Every single thing about these guys screams of a terrestrial. It just reeks of a terrestrial ancestry, right? It doesn't make any sense without that.
I also want to point
Good.
out, I didn't know the thing about smelling, but you also pronounce astragalus weird. But also, whales have multi-chambered stomachs. They still have the stomach of a ruminant, of something that eats grass and leaves on the ground, like an artiodactyl would. So, like, just there's so much that is pointing in this
And it's
direction. It
not
is not just lines on paper. Sorry, go ahead,
and
Erica.
it's not common design either, because there are
Nope.
other mammals that have done this same exact transition. Sirenians, pinnipeds, for example. Other guys that have done this, and they're more fits for the water. It's a completely different setup. There's absolutely no reason for modern whales to have every single possible link to a terrestrial. They did not descend,
Nope.
sister.
You're crunching again a little bit, Erica.
Okay. Again, I hate to do this, but I hear Erika. You say Indohyus has this, Indohyus has that, Indohyus has this feature. When you actually see, this is the thing. When you look at these ear structures, we're talking about fossils that are supposedly millions of years old, and
Oh,
even
no.
the idea. Oh, hold
Are
on,
you
hold
a
on.
younger
on.
creationist,
What?
Anthony?
Let him
No, I'm
finish
not.
it.
I'm
Let him
not.
do it.
But hold on.
Anthony.
First of all,
Anthony.
Let him do
Anthony,
it.
back off.
oh,
Your
Okay.
microphone.
I'm sorry.
Back off your microphone.
I think the problem is I'm actually talking very loudly. Is this better?
Yeah, you have to account for it. You can talk loudly. Just move your mic when you do. Go ahead now. I'm
Okay.
dying for you to finish this sentence.
What I was trying to say is, they make claims, and if you actually look at the non-cartoon version of the fossils they present, it's like, what are they actually looking at? Like, they don't ever prove their claims. They just hope people like Erika just read what they say and just go online and say the same thing they're saying. And I feel like that's kind
Anthony,
of what's happening here.
Have you ever seen even a picture of the fossils and structures that Erica and I are talking about?
I've seen pictures of Pachycetus, the skull fossil, and I
So
wonder to
no.
myself,
Is the-
where's the?
It
I've
sounds like
seen.
no is the answer.
The
Because we
involucrum
can
is
do.
inside the skull, Anthony, so you would not have seen a picture of it looking at a skeleton of Pachycetus, which means that you have not done your due diligence. If you're saying I don't find the identification of the involucrum and its taxonomic lumping with other cetaceans convincing, brother, you best have looked up a picture of the involucrum. You better know what it looks like, and you better know how it compares to other extant terrestrial mammals versus modern cetaceans. Otherwise, you're up a creek. I mean, you're arguing completely from incredulity, which I could do the same exact thing with the shape of the earth. When I walk outside, woof, it looks flat to me.
It looks flat. The biggest issue for me, Anthony, is that you're going to sit here seriously and tell the two of us that we are just parroting what we've been told, and that these scientists didn't actually prove anything. They just said the name of a bone, and here we are saying different, and you're now doing that. You are repeating what you heard some lying creationist say. You have not yourself checked this stuff out, which, don't get me wrong, I'm not a whale biologist. I have a good friend who has studies whale evolution and has discovered a couple of species of whales and has published a ton of shit on it and comes over to my place and we talk about whale evolution sometimes. I'm not checking his stuff, but I can talk to him about it. We can actually dig into it a little bit. I can talk to my professors about this stuff. Even at my intro to bio course, at my 1000 level, we argued creationism in the class. At every level of my education, we have talked about this stuff. And you're going to sit here and tell us that we are doing the thing that you're doing, and that makes us brainwashed by education. Again,
But he hasn't
this
even,
is
he hasn't even looked up the pictures for himself. That's the part that's driving me crazy. Is that it's like, it'd be one thing
that's
if
what
you
I'm
were
saying.
sitting here. Yeah, like that's nuts to me. That's absolutely nuts to me.
You're accusing us of just buying into something without any evidence and without any questioning, while you are doing exactly that for pseudoscience. Like, how is that
Well,
okay with you?
Well, all right. Let me give you another. Let me give you another example. This is why.
No,
This is
I'd
why.
like you to answer my question.
What is your question?
Okay, so you weren't listening, but I'll repeat it then. How is it okay with you personally that you are doing the exact same thing that you are accusing us of doing and saying that we are not being scientific because we're just listening to these things and we're not actually looking them up or not actually researching them when we are, and you aren't checking any of this stuff. You're just repeating what some lying evolutionary or intelligent design proponent says. You're not checking this stuff. You're not looking it up. You've never studied any of this. You don't talk to anybody who knows anything about this. You've never even seen a picture of these things. So how is it okay with you to be doing the thing that you're accusing us, falsely accusing us of doing?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, because I know this is what they do. I've seen it happen so many times. What they see, this is why I call them scientist priests, because in the scientific domain, even within a single field such as biology, there are so many facts to be known that are so obscure and basically not all of it can be known, that even if you have a graduate level study of these topics, you do rely on the investigations of other people. So at some
Anthony,
level, you have to hold on, let me just finish.
how
You have to take what they say on faith, but you don't see it as faith. You just say, oh, he's a scientist. He said this.
no
He's right.
two
I'm going to
things.
go with it.
Two things on this. I'm going to say two things on this. First of all, I have just demonstrated to you in this conversation that that is absolutely not what I do, because I have seen the photos of the involucrum. I've worked with many of the hominin fossils in my hands in the National Museums of Kenya. Forrest is also getting his graduate degree and is working with the material.
A second graduate degree.
His respective fields. Yeah, his respective fields himself. So you're talking to two people who, unlike most people, I will say, and it's a great, great privilege to have this opportunity, we do directly follow and fact check other scientists because that is our job. You can't write a thesis or a dissertation without a literature review, which involves seeing what other people say and knowing why they're saying it. But here's the more important thing. I don't think that you know how science works. What is the scientific method?
The scientific method is creating, well, there's different ways of thinking about science and doing science. I mean, it's creating a hypothesis and creating experiments to test the hypothesis and seeing what happens
Okay,
based
stop.
on the experiments.
Perfect. You create a hypothesis, right? Now, the first step of the scientific method is making an observation. So you can generate a question and then make a hypothesis on it. But the important part you nailed, right? Make a hypothesis, test the hypothesis. What happens if you test your hypothesis and you're right?
It could mean that the hypothesis is correct, I suppose.
Okay, cool. What happens if you test the hypothesis and you're right, and then other people test the same hypothesis and it's right, and you guys are all doing this over the world over for let's say 50 years?
It would, it would seem to support whatever the hypothesis is to a greater extent.
Okay, right. Do you know how these lineages that are created, these lines on paper, do you know how the research on these lineages is conducted?
The imaginations of evolutionary scientists.
Nope, because you know you're getting
Nope.
trapped. But thank you. You start by making an observation. We need a transitional species between fish
you
and
go.
land-dwelling tetrapods. If that
Hold
is
on.
true,
Hold on.
you
Hold on,
understand
hold
what
on,
I'm
hold
saying?
on. You just
No, she's going to finish her sentence.
Hold on.
I'm gonna finish my sentence because this is
Right.
part of the point.
I'm going to put a
If
bookmark right
evolution
here,
is-
though. I'm going to put a bookmark right here.
I
If
don't give a shit.
evolution
Let
is
her finish.
correct, if evolution is correct, we need a transitional species between Eusthenopteron and Acanthostega or Ichthyostega. So you create a hypothesis. You say, well, if there's a transitional species that links fish relatives to land-dwelling relatives, then this animal probably lived somewhere in the time period that's in between when these two fossils are found that was coastal. So then you go and check that coastal period and you say to yourself, if it's transitional, it should have, if and only if, Anthony, evolution is correct, this set of characteristics. So now you've got your whole hypothesis set up. Now you go looking. This is how it's conducted with every single kind of science out there. If the Big Bang Theory is true, then we need to find these signals. If germ theory is true, then we need to find these kinds of clinical signs, right? That's how a hypothesis is formulated. So then you go out looking. We're looking for our transitional species that links Eusthenopteron and Acanthostega or Ichthyostega. Neil Shubin did it. He found Tiktaalik. He found it in Greenland. It was found exactly where he predicted it would be with the morphology he predicted it should have if and only if, Anthony, evolutionary theory is true. Now, when I say we need a transitional species, we do to support evolutionary theory. And every single time we have ever gone looking, we have found it. Do you see what the problem is here? You do not unilaterally apply science. You're applying it lopsided. And in addition to that, you don't even know how the scientific method works well enough to know how it would be applied to a field like astronomy or paleontology or geology. That's your problem.
Erika, I'm
making a prediction right now.
Okay.
I'm sorry, hold on. Okay, go ahead. I just had to make a little prediction. Go ahead.
First, let me preface, Erika, you would greatly benefit from some philosophy, because you said, and this is what I said earlier, you said if evolution is true, we need a transitional form. So there
That's a
you
hypothesis,
go.
Anthony.
Hold on.
That's a hypothesis,
is your
Anthony.
the hypothesis? Wait, hold on. You presuppose evolution is something that happened, and you say to yourself, we need to find a transitional form.
That's
let him finish.
Works.
Let him finish. I need this. I need this.
That's exactly what you just did. You said evolution's true. We need a transitional form. We're going to go find one, and that's what they do.
I made a prediction before Anthony started talking. I wrote needing in quotation marks plus searching equals faith and dogma. Thank you, Anthony. You are the most predictable person on the planet, and that's how science works. It's about testable predictions. If evolution is true, not because evolution is true, if evolution is true, then we should be able to find this, and we find it. And if Anthony is a totally dishonest creationist spewing, just doesn't know shit about science, just a robot repeating ID talking points, then he will say that what Erika just said was defining dogma by taking it massively out of context and forgetting the word if. I made a testable prediction. I'm a fucking scientist.
Forrest, that's some pro level predicting right there, because the way that you phrased it even was appropriate. If Anthony is spewing creationist talking points, then we need him to say that you're assuming evolution to prove evolution, which is precisely what happened. Yep. Anthony, formulate a hypothesis for me that doesn't operate under the lattice. If X is true, then we need to find Y. Formulate a hypothesis for me that doesn't fit that lattice.
Why should we assume a hypothesis is necessary?
Because that's the scientific method. What?
I'm going to answer questions. I just don't need any questions. If I don't have any questions, I've already answered them. It makes sense why you believe in the Bible, Anthony.
I'm so sorry. How
the question should be this. Here the thing is, all right, let's go with Tiktaalik, because this is what you just said.
Go with them.
When Neil Shubin, I believe, is the scientist who discovered this creature, or whatever it is, this creature.
Yeah, I told you his name. I gave you his name.
He wasn't listening. It doesn't matter.
I know. I was going to say this earlier, Forrest, but he completely, when I said you need to find, if evolution is true, you need to find why, he completely shut down. He didn't hear a single additional thing.
Yeah, he had already decided. When you said the word need, it was like, yes, you need a thing. And then the word if went out the window, the scientific method went out the window.
He was absolutely shut down after that.
It's propaganda of the gaps. He knows that germ theory is true, even though he's never studied germ theory. He knows plate tectonics is true, even though he's never studied plate tectonics. He knows that the Earth is round, even though he's never went out to space to check. He knows the heliocentric model is true, even though he's never looked through a telescope to check and make sure that this all. He's never done Copernicus's calculations versus Kepler's calculations. He doesn't know if planets orbit in sphere, in perfect circles, or in ellipses. Doesn't know any of that shit. But he takes it all on faith. But with evolution, this man, who has a bachelor's of arts, is going to tell us that science is just a matter of dogma and faith. Please continue, Anthony. Tell us why we're wrong.
I don't know that he's going to be able to recover from that, but by all means, Anthony, tell me how you're going to formulate a hypothesis in science without formulating a hypothesis. I would love to hear this.
Well, what these scientists should be doing, instead of presupposing a certain desired outcome, which is
That's
what
not
I'm
what they're
hearing
doing,
being
but
done, is what
no,
they
it's
just
go
if
ahead.
say to
evolution
themselves.
if evolution is true, we find XYZ. That's the hypothesis. That's the prediction.
That's called a
You literally
testable
cannot-
prediction.
Yeah, you cannot do
What-
science without an if-then question baked into it. That's how you test a hypothesis. If you are right, then you need to see XYZ. If you are wrong, then you won't see it. So I'm going to ask you yet again, how are you going to formulate, you specifically, Anthony, I'm saying to you, okay, try to prove evolution for me, right? Not that you can prove anything in science, but try to prove it. Formulate a hypothesis for me that, hell, you can have all of science. Formulate any scientific hypothesis or question that doesn't involve having a support or deny on the basis of finding specific data.
I think the question should simply be, what happened? It shouldn't be, if evolution happened, then we should find this. It should just be, what? Here's the thing.
Yeah,
Intelligent
okay,
design.
yeah. And how do
Yeah,
you
so
confirm?
so
how
it's
do you
nothing.
confirm or deny a? How do you confirm or deny a specific idea? I've got two competing ideas. I'm trying
Well,
to
all
figure
right,
out.
let me go. All right.
No. Hold on. I've got to prove whether or not I'm trying to figure out if continental drift is something that happens. Right? I've got this idea. I think to myself, maybe the plates are moving. Right? So how do I now investigate that using your frame of reference here? What happened?
For me, it should say, if the principles of plate tectonics.
No, you can't say if. We just established that. That means
Yeah.
you need to know that you can't say if. You're just asking what happened. How do you tell what happened? How do you test whether or not plate tectonics is real? Just by asking what happened. Show us.
Okay, I would say an if-then is appropriate in basically all questions.
Oh, wait. Doesn't that just presuppose that plate tectonics is true?
You presupposed it, Anthony. You can't do that in science. That's presupposing plate
You're
tectonics
wrong.
happen to prove plate tectonics. You can't do it. Sorry. Game over.
Well,
I don't think that we're going to recover from this one.
What you can do is you can reach a desired outcome from the if to the then by exactly what you did. You said, if evolution is true, then we need a transitional
You can reach
form.
a desired outcome.
Then we need. Thank you, Anthony. Precisely.
Yeah.
If evolution is true, then we need. You said it yourself. Mwah, you're on it. You've gotten the idea. You're on board with the scientific method. So now that we are on the same fucking page, let me ask you again: how is Tiktaalik not a fulfilled prediction of evolutionary theory? What would you expect to see to support evolution if you are not looking for transitional species that you have outlined in a prediction beforehand, what they should look like and where they should be found?
All right, there's two things I want to say to this. All right, and I want to say,
One of them better be the answer to your question.
It is. They're both answers to her question.
Perfect.
They're both answers to her question.
Neato.
Well, actually, one of them's not. But the first thing is, I want to go back to our scientist priest, Neil Shubin, who went out to the middle of nowhere and dug up some fish creature and said, you know what? This looks kind of like what I'm looking for. And, you know, it kind of looks like it's from 200 million years ago. Bingo, and put it in the books. And, you know, let's make sure that people on Reddit read this and they'll believe it.
Anthony, are you a young Earth creationist? I asked this earlier and I forgot about it because of all the dipshittery in the middle. Are you a young Earth creationist?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. But they can't say a bunch of bones lying in the ground is. I don't know. I accept that it could be billions of years old, but here's the thing. I know they can't.
I have different questions. I have different questions now.
How do we date fossils? In your opinion, how do we date them? No.
That's what I'm getting to. We don't. We can't. We
He's
can't
gonna
date
say
them.
we so we can't. We can't. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so
Yeah.
So when he
can
goes
you
out
date
there and
rocks?
he finds a fish, I actually don't even think
Can
we
you
can date
date rocks?
rocks because
can
Okay,
you
probably
can you
can, but
define can you explain just really
Wonder.
quickly, Anthony, Steno's laws? You familiar with Steno's laws of
I'm
superpositioning?
not familiar with Steno's laws. I'm not.
Okay,
Sorry.
so if say we have three rock layers, one on top of the other. We look at like the Grand Canyon, it's all these strata, right? So we have these three rock layers on top of each other. Which one is the oldest?
The one on the bottom.
Right. So let's just say we don't know shit about how to date fossils. We got a ton of rock layers here, right? The ones on the bottom are going to be the oldest. The ones on the top are going to be the newest. So if we have some animals that look like just a fish, some Sarcopterygian, just some lobe chunky looking coelacanth fish down on the bottom, and about halfway up we have like a Tiktaalik looking guy, these really robust like leggy things, and then a little bit higher up we have a proper tetrapod, Ichthyostega, something walking around on all four on dry land, right? What do you now know about these animals? What is the thing that you fundamentally understand about this sequence?
Well, what you would know is that the layer on top was put there more recently.
We established
And
that. I'm
that's
asking
really-
you, what do you know about these fossils? What do you know about these animals?
All you know is that you were buried in that layer. They were buried in that layer.
No, you
No?
now know
No?
when they lived relative to each other. So you understand there's relative dating methods and there are absolute dating methods. We're going to pretend there are no such things as absolute dating methods right now. There's only relative
we're
dating
gonna
methods.
pretend that, and then it's
For now,
coming
we're
back
going to
to
pretend.
me.
Eventually,
we're gonna
we're
get
going to
back
get into
to
like, we're going to talk about the fossil fuel industry and all the reasons why
Yes,
there's
sir.
absolutely, yes. But for just this moment, we'll pretend, Anthony, that you know what you're talking about and that there's no such thing as an absolute dating method. We only have these relative dating methods. If we have these three types of fossils in this sequence, we now know relative to each other how they lived and when they lived, right? So if we take, say, for example, back going to the cetaceans, they have the same bone structures across all of these. That's a sign of common ancestry, that they're in a phylogeny together, that they're all related because they have the same structures. We call that shit homology. So if they have a homologous structure, a synapomorphy in this clade, we know which one came first and we know which one came later, and we don't find the fossils down there up here, which means they're extinct, and we don't find the fossils up here down there, which means they are recent, and we see the same bone structures, the same homologous traits going from one to the other. What can you infer, not through dogma, but through a magical process called inductive reasoning, from this fossil sequence, Anthony?
That the ones on top evolved later, I'm guessing.
And where did they evolve from?
Well, I should say they existed later.
How did they come into existence?
I don't know.
So now we go and we look at like observational experiments into evolution, where we can see evolution happening before our very eyes. We know, you agree, surely, that natural selection is a thing and that adaptation and microevolution are a thing, right? You agree with microevolution, yeah?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So I can show you that I can walk 10 feet. And so if you later find me walking that I'm 10 miles away, you don't have to wonder if I farted so hard that I propelled myself all that way. You can just say, he did the 10 feet thing a whole shitload of times and eventually got over there, right? So if you accept microevolution, and you can see now we have this fossil and then the next fossil and then the next fossil in different layers from different times, and they share the same bone structure, but they have slightly different bodies, you know that microevolution works. These fossils are more recent. Those ones are older. Where did the more recent ones come from? Anthony, what is the most logical and parsimonious, that's a biology word, so in conclusion, that tells you where these new fossils came from?
I would still say not evolution.
So, to be clear, we're talking about basic, just like a logical principle here. We know that microevolution happens, that there can be change within a clade, within a species, whatever like that. And we see now three different types of, three different examples of the same type, the same, I'll even use your words, the kind of animal, right? Three animals of the same kind here in these layers that are stacked one on top of another. You agree that they can change phenotypically over time through successive generations, through mutation and selection. You agree that the ones on top are younger than the ones on the bottom. You agree that the ones on the bottom are extinct and that the ones on top are extant. You agree that the ones on top do not have any fossils of the one on the bottom, and the ones on the bottom are not visited by any fossils of the one on top. And you're telling me that even though you know the process that evolution could take place, you have evidence of this evolution taking place. You can literally see right with your very own eyes the sequence in order. If evolution was true, it would look exactly like that. You are going to say they didn't evolve, though. That,
Well,
Anthony,
okay, let me.
is
Hold on.
dogma. That is a dogmatic position based on faith rather than evidence that you took uncritically without thinking because somebody told you to and you didn't check, which is the thing that you have spent an hour accusing Erika, myself, and all other biologists of doing. You are a hypocrite.
Hey, speaking of hypocrisy, Anthony, you put gas in your car? You drive a car? You heat your house?
You want to get to fossil fuels so bad. I'm so ready for it.
You did do that? So, sorry, I missed it because Forrest was getting so hype about it because I'm also getting hype about it. You do use, you use fossil fuels, yeah?
I will answer your question. Yes, I do. But let me just say that when Forrest was asked me if I thought was evolution, I had pictured a macroevolutionary lineage. So I do believe.
No, you didn't, because I specifically asked you about microevolution.
I know that, but I still had in my mind a macroevolutionary lineage. But yes, I do. So where do you want to? What is it about fossil fuels, which I believe is a misnomer? But go ahead.
Oh, okay, cool. So we're dealing with somebody who doesn't think fossil fuels come from fossils. Where does fuel come from? Like, where does oil come from?
I've seen evidence that it's produced by natural processes.
What
from
natural
what
processes produce oil?
I don't know, but it seems to me quite possible that.
So why is it possible? What is convincing to you about it? Because you're saying you're beating around the bush.
Because there's all kinds of substances being produced on the earth all the time, and it seems to me like oil could possibly be one of them.
How do you get an organic compound like oil from the earth, from an inorganic rock? How do you do that? Oh, look at this. Oh, how the tables have turned with the abiogenesis conversation. How do you get an organic slurry like oil from just plain old rocks? What happens?
Well, I'm not an expert in the chemistry of oil, but it probably has some similarities to organic, but I don't think it would constitute a basis for like a living organism. It's not sufficient, is what I'm trying to say.
No, why not? If you can't defend the idea that fossil fuels don't come from dead organisms, I'm going to be upset because you've been very confident in this conversation so far that Forrest and I are getting our sources again just from faith, just from hearing other people say it. If you're about to tell me that you think that it's not compelling that oil comes from dead organisms because you heard somebody muse about it, but you can't even recapitulate the musing itself, I'm going to be upset. So maybe take a minute,
especially
look up what
considering the fact that, especially considering the fact that is once again exactly the thing that you are claiming that Erika and I are doing.
And keep in mind that we see oil and coal forming today, right? Like these things form today exclusively from dead organisms. That's it. That's the only place they form from. So we're appealing to a magical rock process that no one has ever seen, probably to deny global climate change. I've heard this song and dance play out before, but in very fringe circles. I've actually never met somebody with this perspective in the wild, so this is new for me. But I would like to hear you explain to me, Anthony, since you believe it, you found it compelling enough to doubt the entire fossil fuel industry. You tell me, how does a rock make oil?
I can't tell you, but hold on. I will say that I understand that there are some very problematic situations with the idea that oil comes from dead organisms. For one,
There is not a single,
Like
we
what?
see this happening now.
Like
We see this
like
happening
what?
now.
for instance, the oil deposits are too deep in the rock layers for them to have buried organisms that deep in the earth. Is one of the bigger
What
problems. that I've seen.
organisms,
How long?
what dead
Yeah,
organisms
it's always
make
gonna.
oil?
Say that again. I didn't hear what you said.
Which
Oh,
dead
wait, no, I need to
organisms
make
make
another. Hold
oil?
on, wait. Don't, Anthony. Don't. I'm gonna make another prediction really quick.
First, I'm
Okay,
glad you're
okay,
joking
go ahead.
about this because I'm mad frustrated right now.
Oh, I've
Go
got
ahead, tell
several
us.
other questions. Okay, now say the dumb shit you're about to say, Anthony.
No, I literally did not hear what her question was.
Sorry,
Go
I'll
ahead.
repeat it. We were speaking over each other. That's on us. What dead organisms make oil, and what dead organisms make coal?
What dead organisms make oil?
You said that
Um,
you had a problem that dead organisms, they're too deep. So surely you have in mind which organism it would be too deep for them to create oil. Surely you've thought. I know you have. So tell me which ones can't be that deep.
I don't believe there are any organisms which have ever gone that deep in the earth in Earth's history.
Which are we claiming? Which are we claiming make oil? What, according to the hypothesis that oil is dead
Oil-
organisms, which dead
I'm not
organisms
gonna
would
lie.
it be?
Oil formation is not my expertise, so I will
We're
gladly
asking
yield
you.
whatever. I can't
Which
even
one
tell
do
you
think?
which organisms do and don't. I don't.
Yeah, I have a prediction I wanted to test.
Show us what was your prediction, Forrest?
I was betting you was gonna say dinosaurs.
I also thought he was going to say dinosaurs. So
Damn
I'm going to
it.
use coal as an example because coal is a fun one. The reason why coal exists in such massive seams is because when forests first evolved, there was nothing that could digest lignin, right? Bark couldn't be broken down. No derivatives of trees could be broken down. So massive fossil forests exist because trees died for millions of years with nothing to digest them, crunched under one another's own weight, were eventually subject to deposition and immense amounts of pressure that over time, as we see happening today in various stages across the planet, eventually turns them into coal, right? The reason that they are quite deep is because the Carboniferous was hundreds of millions of years ago, and there are rocks far deeper than coal seams. There are rocks far deeper than oil seams, and some of those rocks have fossils in them now. Anthony. In fact, you can utilize index fossils to find good spots to drill. We actually use them to help us. And do you know what else we use to help us drill? We use radiometric dating, the way that we date rocks, because some layers are much richer than others. So here's my question. Basin modeling via radiometric dating is a ubiquitous technique in the fossil fuel industry, regardless of which fossil fuel you are looking at. Do you want to explain to me why a multi-trillion-dollar a year annual industry is relying on a methodology, that being radiometric dating, that doesn't work?
It might work in a relativistic sense, but not an absolute.
How? No, how? You have to explain how.
How's the difference?
It's just, this is
It
physics.
depends.
This is really
It depends on the.
basic
It depends on the.
I have.
It depends on the initial assumptions. So if you
What are
if
the
you set up
initial
some initial
assumptions?
boundary, the initial assumptions, from what I understand, of radiometric dating are the initial amount of whatever radioisotope they're measuring, and the decayed amount that they're looking for. So,
right, so this is John Woodmarap claims. I know exactly where these claims come from, and every single one of them is incorrect for reasons that are extremely obvious if you have a friend who's in geology, of which I have many. Now, starting conditions, we know that rocks form with all parent because, and I know that this is going to sound crazy, but we watch rocks form today. And they are all apparent with the sole exception of magma chamber mixing, which, wouldn't you know it, has diagnostic criteria. We know what those diagnostic criteria are because we can go to chambers that have magma mixing and look at how they differ from volcanically new igneous rock that lacks those diagnostic criteria. The second question is the decay constant? Yes, because if it weren't constant, if it were too fast or too slow, nothing that relies on any law of radioactive decay, from GPSs to nuclear physics in a reactor, would work. The second is, does it end at all apparent? Yes, we also observe this happening today. And with all of that together, piece by piece by piece, in addition to the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of drills that occur every single decade, we know that radiometric dating works and is robust. I'm going to add something on top of this, Anthony. Radiometric dating corroborates itself. So if you're using uranium lead, it can be corroborated by potassium argon. That shouldn't happen. Two different types of radiometric dating shouldn't be able to corroborate one another and work at the same time, but I'll do you one better. We also see radiometric dating corroborated by historical records. When we radiometrically date the Mount Vesuvius rocks of Pompeii, they match the calendar year of the eruption that we get from the Roman archives. We can use dendrochronology, the rate at which trees deposit rings, to corroborate radiometric dating, which we have done, and corroborated it with a third method, varve production, which is little seasonal layers that lakes leave every year that you can parse out spring from fall on the basis of pollen content. But my absolute favorite of all, the one that does it for me, is that radiometric dating is corroborated by the rate at which the continents are separating from one another at the mid-Atlantic ridge. You can look at the seafloor spreading that occurs at this ridge. And as you move closer to the ridge, the dates get younger. And as you move further away from the ridge, the dates get older, because that's where the crust is thin and new magma is welling up to the surface. New magma means new rock, which means it's got a date of 0. So what you can do is you can look at the rate at which the continents are moving apart from one another. It's about the rate at which your fingernails grow. You can take that back in time, take it back 100,000 years and see where the continents are. Go to that spot on the mid-Atlantic ridge and radiometrically date it. They will match. They have matched because this was a study that was actually done. Absolutely none of this should work. Stepwise corroboration across dozens of different methods of dating things. If radiometric dating doesn't work, but honestly, the best thing for me is just that the fossil fuel industry uses it. If there's one thing that spurs correct methodology, it's fucking capitalism. So I'm going to ask you again, why doesn't radiometric dating work?
Well, there's a lot. I mean, there's so much to go over. All right. Let me do it this way. Let's just assume that radiometric dating does work in an absolute sense. Okay.
Let's assume.
Did you see Neil Shubin pick up those rocks and take them into the lab, and which layers he got them from, and
that's unreal, Anthony. Honestly, Forrest, if we're going to have this conversation go down the rabbit trail of if you weren't there to see every scientist run every experiment, then you can't trust it, I'm tapping out. There's absolutely no way to convince Anthony of anything if that's his criteria. And honestly, if Anthony were in charge with that way of looking at things, we would be sent back to the dark ages in 0.06 picoseconds. So I'm going to go ahead and tap out if that's what your trajectory is here, Anthony.
Well, so am I still talking? Am I still on?
Yeah, you're on.
Unfortunately.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. So you have your scientist priests, and you're not going to question America. And I really hope one day you wake up from your religion and start to question
Anthony,
things.
Have you ever written or read the methods section of a scientific paper?
I know what it is.
So no. So yeah, what you have never read is the reason why that isn't a faith claim or a religious claim. They write it the fuck down, and they take pictures, and they report on it. And then replicability, you can go check and make sure that what they're doing and what they're saying is actually accurate. Again, you are locked in this conspiracy theory that scientists do the shit that you do. The conspiracy that you have continuously pushed for an hour and 18 minutes, Anthony, is that scientists behave like you. And that's completely fucking unacceptable. And I agree. The way you behave and the way that you believe in intelligent design is completely fucking unacceptable. And your best argument that you've been giving us this entire time is to try like hell to drag us down to your level. And it just doesn't fucking work, because over and over and over and over, we have shown that you do not know what the fuck you were talking about. And when we do actually look at the things you're talking about, they work phenomenally. And the only response that you have consistently, reliably, predictably given us is, well, fucking, you're just believing somebody else then. When we don't. We actually critically analyze it, which was the first thing we covered in this call. I was going to talk to you, Anthony, the way that Erika talked to you about fossil fuels. I was going to ask you about vaccines. If evolution isn't real, why do we need new vaccines all the time? Why are we always getting new flu shots? But I have a different question. It'll be my last one before we move on. You're seriously sitting here asking us about the testable experiments for evolution. You're asking us for our faith-based claims that we're believing scientists and all this stuff. What experiments, what testable predictions can you provide for us to demonstrate the validity of intelligent design that you yourself have some understanding of and have actually seen carried out?
Well, there's different types of science. There's historical sciences, and there's...
And now we're talking about answers in Genesis shit. Yeah. Anthony, for somebody who's going to call in and tell us that we are brainwashed by science, you've got an especially shiny and squeaky clean brain going on up there. I seriously encourage you to look into just what science is and how it works, because here's a fun fact. Whether or not you are related to your parents is a faith-based historical science claim based on the answers in Genesis dumbass model of historical versus observational science. Science is science, Anthony. If you do it right, you won't be a creationist. And with that, we are now going to move on to a caller that's actually serious and isn't so far up their own ass that they think that they understand science better than the people who actually do it, despite the fact that they don't actually even know what it is or how it works. Thank you very much for your call, Anthony. Talk to you later.
Honestly, Forrest, I feel like if there's justice in the world, Anthony needs to be stripped of all his possessions if they've been touched by the merciful fingers and tinkering of science, and sent off to an island where he can live like the ape that he is. Because there's just, you can't do any science ever with that kind of mindset. I mean, we stand on this is the kind of thing that you would hear from a priest from the Middle Ages. It's absolutely unbelievable. But this guy will sit here all day long and tell us that observational science is better than historical science with his, non-science degree that he didn't want to tell us about, but then evidently he didn't take in for a bio because he didn't know the scientific method. Honestly, I found that extremely frustrating, but very fun.
Yeah, no, seriously. Amargan, I just put a thing in the producer chat. I'm talking about the screening room and everything like that. I don't know what anything is. I'm just putting a note there for later. Sweet. Thanks, man. We've got a ton, lines are completely full with all theists. And so I'm going to say this out loud, just for everybody, because this is what I just put in for Amargan as well. Is like, we have all theists on the line. We just ended a call which opens up a line, and literally it didn't even register on my screen that a line was open because people are calling in trying to get in. So the second that line opened, it was already filled. And so I'm telling Amargan, and I'm telling the chat and everybody watching as well, I don't think we should be taking any atheist calls at this point. I'm going to just stick to theist calls tonight, and I'm down to go as long as we feel like it for right now. So if you're an atheist and you want to call in, maybe not tonight, but if you're a creationist, if you're a theist, if you're a science denier of any kind, creationism, young earth, transphobia, anti-vax, flat earth, we're here for you. We're into it.
Listen, call in. I'm so fired up at this point. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to fight for the next several hours. I'm excited, and I will be remarkably, Forrest and I are both, I believe, notorious for this. We'll be super civil unless you aren't.
Yeah.
And then we'll do blood sports, which would be fun and make us a lot of money and get a lot of clicks.
There is someone in the chat right now saying that I am running and that they're trying to call in and I'm running and won't let we have completely full lines. Keep trying. The second you see me hang up, call again. That's your cue to call in. No one's running. I would love to hear the dumb shit you want to say. This is your chance. I really hope that we get a fucking gender call today. Like, cause I put out a video on TikTok and Instagram and everything about Nancy Mace's dumb fucking biological women sign explaining why the word biological women doesn't mean anything. There is no such thing as a biological woman or a biological man. That doesn't make any sense. And I got a ton of people telling me that they can school me. I want one to call. We want to talk about it.
Call in.
Let's go with.
Do it.
Do you have a particular favorite? We have people who've been holding for like a couple of hours. I want to go for them first if we can, but I want to know if you have a favorite that you're interested in.
I have no preference, honestly. Like I've maxed out my aggro bar right now, so I'm like ready to go on whatever topic. I'll find something to talk about.
Oh my gosh, the people in the chat, you're right. I need a call from the fucking FBI guy. That would be great. There's a dude who's claiming that I'm running from the FBI and that I'm like this secret scam artist who's hiding in plain sight by becoming an internet influencer. And that is how I'm scamming millions of people and staying away from the FBI. I want that fucker to call in.
Thank you for watching that clip. If you enjoyed it, perhaps you should join us. Join us. Join us. Join us. Join us.
Join us.
At patreon.com/calltheline.